In a world full of lies, be honest.
In a world where few cares, be compassionate.
In a world full of feelings, be yourself.
Because the world sees you.
The world is inspired by you.
Because the world can be better because of you.
The current liabilities of Besico has exceeded its current assets by 2,921 million ringgit, and the group also defaulted on some borrowing obligations. The giant steel plant had temporarily ceased its operations, and majority of the employees were retrenched. All these incidents placed significant doubt over the going concern of Besico. How did Besico assess its going concern ability, and what are the future plans?
Regarding the first query, the presumption of going concern for the business implies the basic declaration of intention to keep operating its activity at least for the next year. Even though Giant Steel operation has been ceased, Besico is still going concern as the company has no intention of going into liquidation, since Giant Steel is only one of the subsidiaries of Besico. To strengthen this claim, MFRS 101 presentation of financial statement explicitly state that an entity shall prepare financial statement on a going concern basis unless management either intends to liquidate the entity or to cease trading or has no realistic alternative but to do so. Concerning the default on borrowing obligation and high amount of current liabilities, Besico is currently in discussion with the investor that shows a positive response regarding the plan to restructure Giant Steel and alleviate the debt problem. Giant Steel also managed to obtain restraint order against the creditor, meaning that the company is protected from any proceeding for a certain period of time, so that Giant Steel can reorganize the liabilities obligation. This is important since any legal proceeding against the company will cast doubt on the going concern ability of Besico. As for the future plan, Besico will implement the regularization plan that has been drafted by the appointed consulting firm, Shimi & Co. Based on the research report that have been prepared by the consulting firm, a number of proposals is concluded, which are divestment of non-core business, arrangement and compromise with creditor, injection of fresh capital via new strategic shareholders, share capital reduction, and fundraising via right issue or private placement. The chairman and managing director of Besico, Mr. Charles Cheng, has also personally invited an investor from China to take part in Besico restructuring. The investor shows a positive response and interest in helping with the restructuring plan for the subsidiary Giant Steel. The investors, through their steelmaking company, will also provide Besico with the expertise to modernize and improve their steel production. With this injection of fresh capital and expertise, Giant Steel can again reclaim their position as the biggest HRC steel plant in the country.
The group has recorded deferred tax assets of approximately 378 million ringgit despite the losses in recent years. How did Besico justify the appropriateness to continue to record such deferred tax assets in the balance sheet?
It is appropriate to report the total deferred tax assets amounting to Rm 378 million on the balance sheet. The deferred tax assets represent the deductible temporary difference which result in a lower taxable income in future, and it has been recognized in Besico balance sheet due to the carryover of losses. In that sense, the loss will be considered as an asset. This practice is also mentioned in MFRS 112 income taxes. A deferred tax asset is recognized for an unused tax loss carry forward or unused tax credit, if and only if it is considered probable that there will be sufficient future taxable profits against which the loss or credit carry forward can be utilized.
Despite the evidence of impairment towards the group's property, plant and equipment, the auditors are unable to ascertain the appropriateness of its reported balances at cost basis, as well as its revaluation reserves.
Based on MFRS 116 property, plant and equipment, an entity shall carry an asset at its cost less any accumulated depreciation and any accumulated impairment losses. Therefore, we have decided to recognize our property, plant and equipment by using a cost model. Meanwhile, for the impairment, MFRS 136 impairment of assets seeks to ensure that an entity's assets are not carried at more than their recoverable amount. If the carrying amount exceeds the recoverable amount, the asset is described as impaired. The entity must reduce the carrying amount of the asset to its recoverable amount and recognized as an impairment loss. An impairment loss is recognized immediately in profit or loss or in comprehensive income if it is a revaluation decrease under MFRS 116 or MFRS 138. Therefore, we assess whether there is any indication that an asset may be impaired at the end of each reporting period. Since one of our subsidiaries, Giant Steel Berhad's plant, is left idle due to temporarily ceased operations, we perform an impairment test on our property, plant and equipment. An impairment loss is recognized whenever the recoverable amount is below the carrying amount. After thorough investigation and judgment, we found that fair value less cost of disposal or value in use is less than carrying amount. Hence, it is necessary to calculate the amount of impairment loss, and the new carrying amount of property, plant and equipment will be shown in the statement of profit or loss as an impairment loss. We are using a cost basis, so there will be no revaluation reserves.
The inventories comprise spares, supplies and consumables of 104 million ringgit, which are recorded at cost basis. The auditors unable to ascertain the recoverability of such inventories and hence the appropriateness to report them at cost basis.
As per our concern, we did the recoverability of spares, supplies and consumables of RM 104 million by identifying critical spares to be included in replacement of parts of inventories. We also identify and evaluate excess of such inventories, then expense it in the period they are incurred. As for reporting, the cost for spares, supplies and consumables are recorded at cost basis since these are also part of our inventories that had been classified as cost of conversion. We are referring this matter according to MFRS 102 inventories, which mention that inventories shall be measured at the lower of cost and net realizable value.
Although the Giant Steel plant has temporarily ceased operations, no provision for onerous contract has been made in relation to the offtake agreement with Besico Berhad for the supply of steel products. The auditors are unable to ascertain the extent of adjustments needed for this onerous contract.
Regarding the cessation of Giant Steel plant, there was no provision has been made for an onerous contract. The offtake agreement between Giant Steel and Besico Berhad stated that Besico Berhad was free to dispose of the steel products not taken up by Giant Steel and was to compensate Besico Berhad for losses suffered from such sales. According to the MFRS 137, provisions, contingent liabilities and contingent assets, if an entity has a contract that is onerous, the present obligation under the contract shall be recognized and measured as a provision. Based on our case, we found out that the provision cannot be recognized as there was no probable that an outflow of resources contributes economic benefits required to settle the obligation. Giant Steel has suspended its production in March 2016 due to excessive dumping activities by foreign steelmakers and was not encouraged to resume its operation because there was no new order since January 2016. This indicates the outflow of economic benefits was remote. Hence, the onerous contract was considered as void for financial year 2016 and no provision needs to be recognized.